As we start doing more complex edits, composites, and exports in Photoshop, we need to have a talk about resolution. Are we making our images for web or for print? How big are they going to be? What color mode should you be using? In this video, we're going to walk through how to check those settings, what resolution really means, and how to prepare images the right way without making them look blurry and unusable. As a graphic designer, you need to understand how resolution works in Photoshop, especially when preparing images for print in the web. It really comes down to knowing how many dots or pixels your image has and how they're arranged. Each image is made up of thousands of tiny little colored squares, and zoomed in you'll see these individual pixels. Resolution refers to how many pixels we have crammed into 1 inch of space. Dots per inch is for print, and pixels per inch is for web. But in this course they'll mean the same thing. Zoomed out, thousands of them grouped together and blend into a smooth photo. What makes an image high or low resolution depends on how tightly packed those little dots are and how many of them there are. As designers, we'll also need to be concerned about image dimensions. In print, we'll use inches for width and height, and with web images, we'll use pixels. And the third thing is color space. For color space, we'll use 1 and 2 values, either RGB for web or CMYK for print, because monitors use an RGB color space, and presses print using 4 colors of ink: cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. So in a nutshell, this is how designers need to think about images. To help us understand, let's take a look at a real-world situation. As a designer, I might get something exactly like this from a client. And this information tells us everything we need to know. In this case, the client is looking for advertisements. On the top, they're looking for banners for web pages, and on the bottom, they're looking for print advertisements for magazines. So based on what we just went over, we know that a web image is going to be 72 pixels per inch. We're going to use pixels to measure it, and the color space is RGB. So there's our resolution and color space, and for dimensions you can look at the diagrams for a banner of 468 by 60 pixels and one of 300 by 600 pixels. And at the bottom you can see the print settings. We're going to use 300 dpi in inches to measure under a CMYK color space. And then if you look at the icons there, the half page island view is going to be 4.5 inches by 7.5 inches. Now note these are advertisements. This isn't the image size, this is the ad size. So when we plan our images for these designs, we might want to make the images a little bit bigger in case when we design we want to crop it or zoom in or zoom out a little bit. This image will be in this week's resources, as you need to reference it often until you're able to memorize these settings. So what does this mean for us? Let's open last week's picture of the sandwich. Step 1 is to identify what kind of image we're looking at. What are the dimensions, the resolution, and the color space of this image when we open it. And there's a few places to look for this information. First is the rulers. Right now I have my ruler set to inches, so my image is like 32 by 24 inches. But if you right click the ruler, you can change the dimensions that the ruler uses, from like inches to pixels for instance. And with the ruler set to pixels, we can see this image is about 2300 by 1800 pixels. Another place you can look is down in the bottom left. If you hold your mouse down over this little text area down here, all the information you're looking for pops up. So in addition to the size, we can also see we're working at 72 dots per inch, and we're in an RGB color space. So here's the question of the hour. Are we currently working with a web image or a print image, or both? With this answer, let's head back to our cheat sheet, and we'll see that these settings align with a web image. We're not going to be so concerned with the inches right now. And to finally arrive at the point of this whole video, if you look at the size of our current image that we have, is it going to fit in the space we need it to without having to make it larger? That's the trick. If you increase an image's size over 100%, it's going to become blurry. So in this case, is this image going to work? Yes, because it's 2,300 pixels wide by 1,800 pixels tall, and we only need it to fit into 468 by 60 or 300 by 600. So I think we're covered on using this for the web. So the next question is, can we use it for print? To answer this question, we're going to go up to Image and choose Image Size. And this is the window that's going to give us a lot of information about our image and allow us to change it. In this window, you'll see the estimated actual image file size, the dimensions, how it's going to fit, its current width and height, and its resolution, as well as a setting called resample, which is really important. For width and height, you can use the drop downs to change the dimensions from pixels to inches and back and forth. So the question on the table is this going to work for print? Now, you know our resolution is 72 and our print resolution is 300. So your first instinct might be just to change 72 to 300 and see how it goes. But that would be a problem. If we just change 72 to 300, we're going to physically add pixels to the picture, and we don't want to do that. So in this window, you can actually make that change and see what is going to happen before you commit it. So let's change the dimension to inches and the resolution from 72 to 300 and watch the dimensions of the image grow. In fact, look at the image size. It got huge. Went from like 11.8 megabytes to 205 megabytes. And because resample is on, width and height didn't change. So when we changed 72 dots per inch, which is a much smaller amount of dots in an inch, to 300, we actually added 228 dots per inch. And as you can see, the edges of the image are blurrier because Photoshop made up the missing pixels. To further exaggerate the point, let's change it to 1200 dpi, and then you can see that file gets wicked big and those edges get even blurrier. Remember, we said increasing the file size over 100% makes the file look blurry. Changing it from 72 to 300 this way increases it by 1,600%. So let's put the resolution back to 72. When you're changing resolution, resample should be off. This will lock the dimensions, so we can no longer add or subtract pixels. We can only change the resolution. Why? Because we just took 72 pixels per inch and turned it into 300. We can fit a lot more pixels in 1 inch at 300 than we can at 72. So the dimensions get smaller because the pixels are going to be packed in tighter. When we switch back to 300, note that the image size is still the same amount of megabytes as are the dimensions because, again, we never added or subtracted pixels with resample off. Note that the width and the height changed. The estimated file size and pixel dimensions did not change. So just the resolution was changed. No pixels were added or removed. And the dimensions are about 7.5 by 6 inches. Looking at the options for print output, with resample off, we're able to change the resolution and therefore adjust the output size. We can now see that our image isn't quite big enough for a magazine cover, but it's barely big enough for that half-page ad we were interested in. So this image does work for print. So what happens if we have an ad like, for instance, the full-size page was, the trim size was 8 inches by 10 3/4. This image is not big enough. So at this point, I'd say, well, we're kind of out of luck. You really don't want to make an image bigger for the reason we just went over, is that we have to now start adding pixels to it. But if you have no other choice and you have to make the image bigger, what I would do is convert this to a print image first. And that means taking resample off and changing the resolution from 72 to 300 and saying OK first, and then opening up image size a second time. This time, since we are going to resize the image, we do want to have resample on, and then I'm going to look directly at the width in inches and the height in inches and make it match the magazine cover size. And for resample, Preserve Details 2 is Photoshop's AI version of resampling. Now, I gotta be honest with you, this is not my favorite idea. Whenever I increase the image size, you'll see that this is thinking because Photoshop is making up a lot of information right now, so it's still going to be a little bit blurry. Whenever I increase an image, if I have to increase it more than 10%, then I go back and find a different image, or go back and take a different image, or head back to the photographer and ask for a new one. Now the trick with Photoshop right now is we're working with a print image, but we're looking at it on a monitor, which is a web display. So even though it looks crystal clear here, when you zoom in quite a bit, you'll see there's a little bit of blurriness, even more so than there was before, on some of those high contrast edges. And again, on our monitor, it's going to look okay, but when you go to print it, people are going to start to notice because we increased this by like 200%. That's a noticeable change, and people are going to see it. Now that I know we're using a print image, I'm going to set the rulers back to inches, and you can double check on the bottom left there by holding your mouse down against that little data area, and it'll pop up and it'll tell you that we're now at a 300 dpi image, and it'll tell you what the image's width and height are. You can also see that we're still using the RGB color mode, but print requires CMYK. And to fix that, we're going to head up under Image, Mode, and switch to CMYK color. Since I want to preserve my layers, I'm not going to flatten it, and then this is going to ask what color profile to use. That's a whole different class, so just take the default for now. If you check your data again, you'll see that now we have a full print image, 300 dpi, measured in inches, big enough for the print area, and the CMYK color space. Now for class, we're going to keep our files as PSDs because that's what I need to see, and this allows us to go back and work on them later on. But when you're exporting this for a client or a print house or someone that's like a magazine that's going to print it or use it for the web, how do we save our images? Let's go to File and Save a Copy. For print images, your top files in this order are a PDF, a TIFF, or a JPEG at 100% compression. These formats will preserve all the data of the image, they'll flatten and rasterize it, and they're also lossless, which means they won't compress the image and lose quality. For the web, in images like social media or emailing or a web banner, you're going to want to use a JPEG or a PNG. The big difference is a JPEG can be compressed, so if you're saving a JPEG, make sure to drop that compression down to like 8 out of 10 or 12. And if you're using a PNG and you have a transparent layer in the background, when you save the PNG, it'll actually have a transparent layer too. So PNGs preserve transparency. So for this week, start committing this to memory. You don't have to memorize the dimensions because the ad sizes will be different every time, but web is always going to be 72 ppi and RGB and measured in pixels, and print is always going to be 300 dpi measured in inches and CMYK color space. Armed with this knowledge, you can now open any image and see if it's going to be the size you need it to be without coming in too small and having to enlarge it a lot and having it become blurry. At any time, you can right-click the rulers to change the measurements. You can access that data panel down at the bottom left, and you can also go to File and Image Size to view more details and make changes. And the big thing when you make changes in here is be sure that resample is off if you're changing resolution. If you're resizing an image, then you definitely want resampling on. So going from 300 to 72 and 72 to 300, resample off. Changing an image from 10 inches high to 12 inches high, that's resample on. And we always change the resolution first, and then we resample afterwards. Lastly, create copies of your files by saving copies as for the web or for print, whether it's a PDF, a TIFF, a JPEG, or a PNG. That's it for this resource. You guys at this point know as much as I do about image compression. So in the next resource, we'll see how to take some of these images and set up a workflow to make this a lot easier now that you have the theory and philosophy down.